Anyhow, there's a well-known story, famous story that most people are perfectly aware of, story of Rabbi Kiva. He was traveling along the road, decided he wanted to stop at a specific place, and he got there, he went to the Holiday Inn, they were booked solid, went to the Days Inn, they were booked solid. He was forced to go into a field with his rooster and his lamp and his donkey, right? What happens, right? He says, Gamzela Tova, this is for the good. I'll be sleeping outside tonight under the stars. Somehow this must be for the good. And he settles himself in. Lo and behold, the wind comes along and blows his candle out. So now he has no lamp and probably no matches, and I guess maybe no stones to knock together. But he's out one lamp, basically. Gamzela Tova. A weasel comes along, I guess taking advantage of the dark, and eats his rooster. So now he has no alarm clock either. Right, to get up for the next morning. And he says, Gamzela Tova as well. And somehow at some point in time, a lion, apparently according to the Gemara, comes along, right, and eats his donkey. And he finds out, and he says, Gamzela Tova, right, sleeps the night, somehow, some way, wakes up the next morning, he goes to the city to buy some food, whatever, and he notices that the inhabitants aren't there. What happened? In the middle of the night, certain bandits came and literally took away all the people from the town, and they robbed the place, and he said, I told you, Gamzela Tova. If I had been accepted in one of these hotels over here and stayed in the town, I too would be a hostage right now. If my light had not gone out, they would have seen it and come after me. If my rooster had crowed, they would have known I was there and taken me or killed me. If my donkey had brayed, they would have found the donkey, etc., etc. So therefore, Gamzela Tova. It's all for the good. Right? Somewhat simplistic story. But we know that he learned this. I mean, he learned it anyhow. I mean, it would have been Rabbi Kiva's Midah, but he had a Rabbi for this. And his Rabbi was none other than Nachum Ish Gamzu. Nachum Ish Gamzu is the one who's famous for saying Gamzela Tova, because he always said it, because of Maisim. But what happened to him, he went to Rome to buy for the Caesar, and there was sand put in the box as opposed to the jewels that were there, and Gamzela Tova, and it worked out for the best, and etc., etc. But the story that they don't tell very often, which I think is even more telling, more to the point, is the story that his Talmidim come and they find him lying on his deathbed, basically, on a bed whose legs are sitting in pails of water to act as moats, so the ants can't crawl up the legs to his body, because his body is totally ravaged and he has no control over his limbs anymore. He's blind. Literally, he's in complete terrible shape. And as Talmidim come in, they say, Rabbi, to see you like this, it's terrible. We can't stand this. What happened to you? He says, no, Gamzela Tova, better you should see me like this now than see what it would look like in the future. In Olam Haba. Why? Because one day I was traveling along the road, and a certain Ani came up to me and said, Rabbi, now, give me some parnas, take some food, anything. He said, no problem, just give me 1 second to dismount my donkey, and I'll give you whatever I have, and he gets off his donkey, he looks behind him, and the guy's dead. He's lying on the ground. And he can't believe him. The couple of seconds he took extra to get off his donkey, as opposed to reaching into his pouch and giving him food, the guy dies. So he's so distraught by the entire thing, he puts himself on top of the man, eye to eye, face to face, and says, the eyes that did not have enough mercy on you, they should be, gouged out, and the limbs that didn't respond to you. He curses every part of his body. All the curses come true. And he says, this is much better. Gamzela Tova, this is much better. Because had this not happened to me in this lifetime here, just imagine what it would have happened to me, in Olam Emes, in Gehenna later on, because of my lack of responding on the spot. A few seconds more he took in the end. Phenomenal story, phenomenal midah to be able to say Gamzela Tova, a situation like that. But there's even one more story. In some respects, even more so this case, even more than Rabbi Kiva's story. In some respects, even more than Nachum Ish Gamzu's story to some degree. But you really can't compare them anyhow, but it's along the same lines. And that's the story of Rabbi Chanuka ben Terajian, right? Basically, who is, he's been teaching Torah Rabbi out in public. The Romans have forbidden it, but he's doing it anyhow. He's putting his life on the line. The Romans catch up to him. They take him, they wrap him in the Sefer Torah that he was teaching. They put wet sponges on his chest, and they light him on fire. Because they want the wet sponge to slow down the flames, so he'll die slowly, as a message for all the Jews who might teach Torah B'Rabbim or teach Torah B'Chlal. And, the executioner who's doing all this is standing there watching him burn and die. And his Talmidim and Brurif comes up, they see she sees her father burning like this. She says, Abba, to see you burn like this is terrible, such a disastrous thing, how can I be solved with this? How can I handle this? He says, not to worry, right? Not to worry. If it was only me burning here, maybe it'd be problematic. But since there's a Sefer Torah burning with me as well, the same God who will avenge the disgrace of the Sefer Torah will also avenge me as well. That's what he says. So don't worry. Gamza Tov. It's also going to work out perfectly fine as well. As Talmidim say, Rabbi, at least open your mouth and the fire go into your mouth and consume you. He says, no, won't do that either. Because the same God who gave me my soul is the same God who will take my soul. I will not speed up and enhance the death process over here. And as Talmidim say, Rabbi, what do you see? He says, I see parchment burning, but Osius flying up to Shemaim. In the meantime, this story is so compelling that the Roman executioner, who basically Mem Teshai Tumah of Mem Teshai Tumah, to be a Roman is one thing. To be a Roman executioner is you're really scraping the bottom of the barrel over here, right? The bottom of the totem pole. And he's watching this whole thing takes place. And he's saying to himself, what is going on? Who are these people? And, how could they do this? And they're having a discussion as if they're sitting in the base measure someplace and having, a cup of coffee and, discussing, the Gemara and the Halacha and the implications. And the guy's burning to death. He's calmly having this whole discussion and, either they're crazy, really crazy, or there must be something about what they do that's so real that even in a situation like this, they can see past it and see the good in the situation. And he goes to the second one. And the executioner says to Rabbi Chaim Taraj, these are stories that have to be understood and analyzed because they're so powerful. We go right over them in the end. And the executioner says, Rabbi, I'm impressed. If I take the sponges off your chest and allow you to burn faster, I can't save your life at this point in time, but I can certainly, speed up the death and cause you less suffering. Do you promise me you'll take me to the world to come with you? He says, yeah, I make a deal. You can come to the world to come with me as well. And he does it, takes the sponges off the chest. He dies quicker, and then he jumps into the fire to join him as well. Right? That's his fast conversion process over here to Yiddishkeit. And a baskol comes out and says that both Rabbi Chanan ben Tarajin and the Roman executioner are muchen l'chayil amim. And I had read somewhere, I can't remember where, that the difference between olam haba and chayil amim, the expression of the Gemara is when a person is going to go to olam haba, he can still go through Gehenna. When the Gemara says you're muchel l'chayil amim, it means you don't have to go through Gehenna even. You go right to the world to come. It says it by Rabbi Kiva when he's dying, right? Another Maisa where basically they take him out because he was also caught teaching Torah, and they take him out and they're pulling his skin off with metal combs, and he's saying the Shema. And his Talmidim are going, there must be a rule to all this. There must be a limit to how far you go with this Mesiras Nefesh business over here. How can you say a thing like this? He says, what are you talking about? All my life, I've been saying, V'ahavta es Hashem Elokech b'chol vavcha, b'chol nafshecha, b'chol medecha, b'chol levavcha, with all my heart I was able to do because I was mostly nefesh all my life, sacrificing myself to do mitzvahs, b'chol medecha, with my money, my possessions. Clearly, I put them on the line for the sake of serving God, but b'chol nafshecha, and I asked myself, when will the day finally come I can show HaKadosh Baruch Hu I'm prepared to give up my life to serve Him. And here it is now, and I'm not going to take advantage of the situation? What kind of dialogues are these? What's going on over here? The rest of the people are screaming their heads off and, save me, mercy, mercy, and they're more interested in the halachic, opportunity and hashkafic opportunity that the situation is creating for them. Phenomenal. Where does that koyach come from? Where does that koyach come from? What's the basis of this? So these parshiot, that we're reading right now, last week, the one before that, this week and one coming up, indicates basically, if anything is Maisa Ava similar banim, these are the ones. But Maisa Ava similar banim is not simply that the Avos did things that we can learn from, meaning that, look, he did this, so we should do that too. He sent gifts, we should send gifts. It's more than that. Maisa Ava similar banim means that when they did something, it had such an impact on the spiritual reality of Maisa Bereshis, and particularly on the generations that came after them, that it changed our way of thinking. It imbued us with koyach. So when Abraham is makriv Yitzchak, or he basically goes through the motions of being makriv Yitzchak of the Akedah, so that gave Chana and all the descendants this after the koich to be able to give up their sons for the sake of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. To be, she says, you tell from Avinu to our last son, right, that he sacrificed one son, and I sacrificed 7 sons over here, right, and now me as well. But the truth is, the only reason why you could even sacrifice one son, let alone 7 sons, was because Abraham was prepared to sacrifice Yitzchak. He put the koich into the world to make it possible that we can be Moser Nefesh to such an extent. That's Maisa Avasim Lebani. Right? Thank you. Right? That's really what it comes down to. That they did things that changed the Metzius of the Jewish people and reality, and they gave us the koich to be able to do things that we take for granted. That's why, for example, we're often, it works both ways. We're often confused because the Gentile world responds to things differently than we respond to. They either, lack a certain perspective or certain, sense of restraint or a certain understanding of perspective, and we expect the world to have the same thing that we have. But the koiches that we have as a nation are unique to us because they came to us from the Avos. That's mais Avos and Lebani. So that's why Yaakov Avinu, when he's sending out the sheep, right, he's actually making, telling them exactly how to deliver them, how much space to set between each of the flocks that were sent. So I heard this last week that Moshe Shapiro spoke about this. I think it's quite well known, but I never actually heard this before. That each one of these sheep, there was 600,000 sheep that he had there, and that by giving over the matanas, which included these sheep, he was actually giving over Jews to Esav. He knew that historically, some Jews would have to go over to Esav at some point in time historically. And Yaakov had no choice in the matter, and he was actually arranging, setting up exactly how it was going to happen. So that's why, for example, Esav, if you spell it Maleh, the way it's actually supposed to be spelled, which is Ayin Sin Yud Vav, you rearrange the letters and you have the word Yeshu, right? Yeshu, right? Which is Yashka. That's the name that they call him, as well as in last week's parsha, also Yeush as well. Apparently, there's also a connection there too. So I mean, it's a longer discussion, obviously with a lot of implication. But the main point was that it was Maisa Avasim Lebani. When Yaakov did something, and Yitzchak and Abraham, but specifically Yaakov, when he did something, he did it because he knew he was imbuing his descendants with certain koiches, for better, for worse, to allow us to be able to survive until the end of history. So, in last week's parsha, he gets to the Yibuk, and he crosses the Yibuk after taking all his belongings over. He has a struggle with the Malach, and the Malach basically, doesn't want to, bless him there, or admit to the Baruch belonging to him, but Yaakov forces the issue. And finally, the Malach says to Yaakov Avinu, he says, what's your name? He says, my name is Yaakov. He says, no longer will you be called Yaakov, but you'll be called Yisrael, right, from this point onward. Why? And the Torah tells you why. It gives you an explanation why. Ki sarisa im Elohim v'im anashim v'tuchal. That's what the pasuk says. Because you struggled with a heavenly being, and you struggled with men, and you prevailed. And then he has the whole struggle with Shechem after that, the whole episode, and then finally in Beit El, what happens in Beit El basically, that Kosh Baruch Hu, Kosh Baruch Hu comes and he confirms the entire thing. He says,
2 months, I'm sorry. The Rebbe's attendance tonight, so we're having tea.
Yeah, I understand.
Tea, and I know these guys like honey. What do you like? I'll give it to you.
Honey's fine, thank you. Yeah.
And tea?
I'm fine.
Yes.
No tea, plain tea? Not even plain tea?
No thanks.
No? Okay.
So the,
Sophie, if it's a Rebbe's your type, put a little dash of whiskey in
I don't have whiskeys. I have,
Scotch?
we have scotch. Is that scotch?
Why don't you just bring the scotch over anyway? And just
It does-
Well, how about that?
it does the same thing.
That liqueur over there.
This one? This orange
Yeah.
stuff? Okay.
In tea?
Yeah, sure.
I have, if you want something, I have we have schnapps.
No, that's fine.
Want schnapps? Steve likes one. I'm sorry, let me take this.
I'm talking. Anyhow, so that's what happens. So the question, there's a couple of questions that could be asked. Number one, first of all, when Kodesh Baruch Hu gave the name change to Avram and Sarah, right, it was a one-shot deal. It happened at one time, right? No longer you called, Avram, you're called Avraham. The Gemara says anybody who calls Avraham Avram or Sarah Sarai, as if that's their name anymore, they're over a positive mitzvah and a mitzvah's losus, and a negative mitzvah. Not by Yaakov Avinu. The Gemara does not explain why. Just the fact that Yaakov is interchanged with Israel for the Chumash That's the way it is. But there's no real explanation as to why it's the case. Second question. Kisarisa im Elohim v'manashim v'tuchal is actually the opposite of the way it should actually be. If we're saying that the name of Yisrael is like a warrior name, it basically describes our struggles and the victories that we had, so really, who's more difficult to fight with? Obviously, the angel's more difficult to fight with. So if the angel is more difficult to fight with than human beings, because an angel's got koich v'kush baruch Hu, Kush Baruch Hu wants the angel to win, the angel's going to win. And he'll give him the koich to do so. So therefore, more logically, you should say you fight with anashim, ki sirisi im anashim v'im Elohim v'tuchal. Because normally, if you say you fight with the bigger boxer, the stronger boxer, and by the way, you also beat the weaker boxer, there's no chiddush over here. Because you already know if you can beat the bigger guy, right, then you can obviously beat the smaller guy too. But if you say you begin and you fight the smaller guy, and then you fight the bigger guy, that makes more sense. Second of all, if, as Rashi says, Anashim is referring to Esav and Lavan, it's also chronologically out of order. Because he met Esav and Lavan first, and struggled with him first, even though the next day he will meet Esav once again, but he's already had his fight with Esav, he's already had a struggle, and with love, and survived both, and the angel comes after the fact. So it should say, Kisarisa im Anashim v'im Elohim v'tuchal. That would be the more logical sequence of the pasuk itself. So the question is, are these real questions, or did something, is what's going on over here a lot different? Thank you. Right, a lot different than we actually think it is. So first of all, as we know, basically the struggles of the Jewish people, even this is a warrior name, Yisrael Kisaris Elohim Hashim V'Tuchal, even though it's a name that describes a battle, the Jewish people are always fighting a spiritual battle, not the physical battle. Any physical battle that we have to fight is always going to be the end result of a spiritual battle that we've lost. Every Galus and Geula always begins in the mind. It always begins in the spiritual plane first. The physical manifestation of either will always be the end result of a process, not the beginning of a process. So that's why the plagues last 12 months. Because the Geula began with the first plague. It only finally was actualized by the 10th plague, because that's how long it took to develop to the point to be able to go out. Likewise, the exile begins the same way as well. It begins with a few, leniencies in halacha, and you can't even notice at the beginning the exile mentality. But it builds and it builds and it builds, till eventually Kosh Baruch Hu says, time to leave the country. Time to go to Galus at this point in time. But it was building for a period of time. So obviously, the struggle that Yaakov had, and he continued to have, was going to be a spiritual one. So then what's the spiritual battle that he's fighting? What's the actual battle that he has to undergo? Right? What is the main struggle? I mean, obviously he's from, obviously he believes in Kosh Baruch Hu. He's living by Torah. He's not going to abandon that. He's not going to, turn his back on Kosh Baruch Hu. These people are solid in their beliefs. And then what's the battle he's actually fighting? There's only one battle that Klal Yisrael actually fights, and the name actually implies this, and the entire story actually implies it. Where does the story actually imply it? Because basically what happens, he gets to Shechem. The last thing it says before he gets to Shechem is he arrives Shalem. He's an Adam Shalem. And the Rizal has a whole arichas what Shalem means over here. But Rashi explains it on a simple level, that he's Shalem b'gufu, Shalem b'mamono, Shalem b'torah. He's complete in his physical body. He was healed from the damage that the Sar Shel Esav did to him. He's complete in his money. He's got all the money he needs. He doesn't have to go looking for any parnas anymore. And he's even complete in his Torah, in love and Garti. He knows all of his Torah. He's been learning. He's strong. He's a complete individual. He's reached pretty much the end of his line. He still has what to live at this point in time. But as Rashi says at the beginning of this week's parsha, he meant to settle down. He's gone through all the struggles, right? Even Rochel, has died. Already? No, not yet. After, right? But Binyamin's on the way. He's got his 12th son on the way at this point in time. He's got the 11 Shvatim. Yosef is born. As far as Yaakov is concerned, it's like time basically to settle down and pass the mantle of leadership over to the next generation. That's the way he looks at it. He gets to Shechem, he mints some money, and he makes, he's prepared to settle down, buy a little land. Eretz Yisrael, he's back in Eretz Yisrael already. And then what happens basically is Dinah goes out, right? And this whole episode with Shechem, occurs. Completely out from left field, a complete shocker in every respect, in every sense of the term. Shechem ben Chamor means Shechem, the son of a donkey. Right? This is literally the lowest you can get. I mean, the Torah is telling you this guy is a real low life, right? And it takes place with none other than Dinah. right? And Dinah, which we said before, Dinah was supposed to have been Yosef, because Leah was mispalel, tremendous mesiras nefesh, for the sake of giving Rochel 2 boys as opposed to 1 boy. So this shouldn't have happened to her, Bechlal, whatsoever. This is totally, where's the Kodesh Baruch Hu in all of this, right? The whole thing is so completely against the grain and so undoing in terms of, Hashgacha Pratis, that Shimon and Levi feel compelled to actually go out and go to war and literally almost cause the destruction of the Jewish people because, as Rashi points out, the Amoraim were prepared to attack because they thought this was the actual taking over of Eretz Yisrael. It was not the time. And what does Yaakov do? What's his response? He remains quiet. He remains silent. Not because he's speechless, but because there's nothing to say. There's nothing to do. I could do what you did, right? And their response is, can we allow our sister, right, to be treated like a zona, like a woman of ill repute? And he's like, basically, what are you talking about? She's my daughter. The exact same thing we see later on in Parshas Shmini, same thing, is that Nadav Avihu, on the happiest day of history almost, basically, the Chanuka of Mishkan, of the Mizbeach, and it's the 8th day of the inauguration, and basically the Kohanim were also being inaugurated, and Aaron's going to become Kohen Gadol, and the Shechina is coming down on top of this entire project, which is the greatest sign of success you can possibly imagine. It's like the highlight of the Jewish journey in the Midbar to this point. And Nadav and Avihu go out and they do this terrible act, and as a result of that, they get 2 lightning bolts basically come up in the Kodesh Kodeshim. They burn out the neshamas of Nadav and Avihu, and they die. Right? And Moshe, as if to console Aaron, comes over and says to him, this is what HaKadosh Baruch Hu had told me way back in, Shmo somewhere, right? That on the day of the inauguration, he's going to be sanctified through his great ones. And I thought that meant you and I, because, we're the elders and we're the leaders, and I thought, we were the greatest of everybody, not because of a guy, but just in terms of Torah knowledge and, yichus and all that. But now I see that Nadav and Avihu are greater than you and I in the end. They made a mistake and it's tragic, but they must have been great people because otherwise it wouldn't be a Kiddush Hashem in the end. V'yidom Aaron, and he's quiet. Doesn't say anything. Right? And Rashi points out, because of this he's rewarded for his silence in the end. Because sometimes silence is a bigger Kiddush Hashem than acting out. Sometimes not responding is a much greater revelation of one's belief in Hashgacha Pratis than actually going and responding to the situation and taking things into your own hands like Shimon and Levi do in the end. So what does Yaakov do? Nothing, really. There's not, what would have Yaakov done? Nothing, really, basically. They may have made the agreement, they would have done bris milah, they probably would have moved on, but it was not a time to take revenge against the people of Shechem, especially since Shechem points out they're shleimim, these people are honest. Once again, the Jewish people are being forced in a position to do things exactly the opposite of what integrity seems to dictate and how we seem to be known. And, it just, as Yaakov says, like you've muddied our name. You've made us, look so bad in the eyes of the rest of the world. And he comes out of this thing intact. Right? And he says, what? What's his response to this? Basically, Gamzu L'Tova. This has to be for the good too. Somehow, to whatever, and I can't imagine, what, there must be a din involved, as Rashi points out. He put din into the box to hide Dinah from Asa because he thought that maybe, he would take her. But Rashi says, maybe he would have done tshuva because of Dinah. Hard to imagine Dinah having the koich to be able to be machzir Asa b'tshuva, but you never know. Rashi says it, you have to assume there must have been some possibility. And Yaakov should have been willing to take that chance apparently. But whatever the situation, whatever the din, somehow there must have been some good in the entire thing. So what does Yaakov do? Right? What does Yaakov, what comes out of the entire thing in the end? So it turns out that there was good in all of that. And that is, as Rizal points out, there was an atzotz kadosh from Adam Arishon that somehow had made it through the generations into Shechem. It was there for a period of time. It had to be redeemed by somebody who could do it and yet somehow survive the entire incident and not be absorbed by the people of Shechem or the Canaanim. Right? With a tremendous quake to be able to go up but come back as well. And who could do that? Someone who was almost Yosef, who's also is Yatsa on Mitzrayim. That's Din in the end. And from that, the Nitzotz comes out of Shechem. Dinah comes back into the fold again. She marries Shimon later on, right? She goes back, and what happens to this little Nitzotz? It gets born in the form of a little girl. They have a child. Shechem and Dinah have a baby girl, but they reject it. Yaakov's family rejects this child because it's born from Shechem. It's born from a bad situation. According to the Medrash, he even put a little necklace around this baby and left it like up in the open, saying that anybody who marries this child is not from the family of Yaakov. It's not, it can't be from the family of Yaakov in the end. And according to the Medrash, a Malach takes this child down to Mitzrayim somehow. I guess maybe someone found it, whatever the case, but it was arranged that the child should go down to Mitzrayim. Potiphar adopts this child, raises the child like his own daughter. When the time comes to marry her off, she marries none other than Yosef himself. And from Yosef and Asnas, the daughter of Shechem and Dinah, comes Ephraim and Manasseh, who every Friday night we bless our children to be like. The symbol of perfect chinuch in the end. Of people who could survive in galus and maintain themselves and never lose perspective of who they are and where they came from. In this entire episode. Because it's mitzvot. And it's no different in this sense what the Alshik says about what happened in Sdom. Right? Avraham would not go down to Sdom, but he knew there was the mitzvot of David HaMelech, somehow he was aware of it. It was time to come out from amongst the klipos, from amongst the tumah. Sdom was the place of impurity at that time. And Avraham was looking at Sdom saying, how do I get in there? How do I redeem the spark? What am I supposed to do? And Lot comes along and says, you know what? We can't get along anymore over here, so how about I move on to someplace else? I was thinking about Sdom. What about Sdom? And Avraham says nothing. Not any place but Sdom. Mr. Kiruv himself, he's like bringing people back to the way of God, and his own nephew wants to go out and become, a Sdomite again. It's like, no, don't go there. He doesn't say anything. Because Abraham knew this must be Hashgacha Pratis. Mm. And Lot goes down there, and he marries a woman from Sdom, and has 4 daughters. 2 get married to men, stay behind, Sdom get destroyed when the city is destroyed. 2 go out with their father and mother. The mother becomes a pillar of salt along the way. Look at that Hashgacha Pratis. Right? Because if she survived, obviously what would have happened in the end. And she becomes a pillar of salt, and they go into their cave, and the daughters think there's no one else around for them to marry and have children from. They give birth to children, which basically becomes Moab, and eventually from Moab comes Eglon, from Eglon comes Rus, and from Rus basically comes, marries Boaz and becomes, open, and all these, in Yishai, and eventually David and Melech. The path of an Nitzotz, a holy Nitzotz from the Klippas out into the open. Gamzu l'tova. It's all for the good. All is part of HaKadosh Baruch Hu's master plan. Whatever happens. And that's why HaKadosh Baruch Hu split up the naming of Yaakov. Before Shechem and after Shechem. Because there's always 2 parts to a transformation in the person. There's the intellectual and there's the emotional. Right? Lots of people walk around with a lot of hashkafa. Lots of people can sit here in a sheer situation and discuss ideas and say, yeah, it's all mishamayim. Does God in the world? Absolutely. Did he make Ma'aser Bereshis? Absolutely. Does he sustain it? Absolutely. Is everything Hashgacha Pratis? For sure. Is it all for good? 100%. And the guy will go out to catch a bus, and the bus will get there 3 seconds before he does, and take off. There's not one for another half an hour. He gets all frustrated. All frustrated. I gave the shoe last night, it didn't work out on the computer. And I came home, and I'm going, I can't believe that this didn't work out. Why didn't it work out? I did this, And in the meantime, all the words go, Gamzu l'tova. The whole shir is about Gamzu l'tova, And I'm struggling to say, Gamzu l'tova in the end because it's difficult. Because intellectually, you can be makabel in 2 seconds, and it makes perfect sense. But emotionally, it's a whole different struggle. So when the angel names Yaakov in advance of Shechem, he's talking on the intellectual level. Yachap, you get it? This is who you are. He even gives a hint to what's coming up by putting Anashim second. Because the fight with an angel, piece of cake. It's easy. Why? An angel works for God directly. Maybe angels work part-time, they moonlight and do stuff on their own too. It's possible, but not usually. If an angel confronts you along the way, it's because HaKadosh Baruch Hu has sent that angel to fight you, to battle you, right? So you're battling with the angel. You can't say, gee, I wonder if this is Hashgacha Pratis, and I wonder if this is all for the good. This is exactly what it is. To fight with the Yaakov, with the Lavan, and an Esav is also not as difficult, hashkafically and mishkachically. Why? Because Yaakov knew who he was dealing with. He knew who Esav was. He knew what was at stake. He goes to Lavan, he knew who he was dealing with. Rachel says, my father's a real trickster. Yaakov says, I'm ready for that. I can be a trickster too. I was trained back home by my mother, took the bruchs from my father. Don't worry, I can match him. Yaakov understood when he fought Esav and fought Lavan that this is historical. There's a major ramifications and implications of these battles. When you know that you're about to have a major battle, you prepare yourself. You gird your intellectual loins, so to speak. You prepare yourself for what's coming up. And therefore you're ready. But you come to Shechem, a place where basically it's like Hefker. And this whole Hefker incident takes place by a guy who's not even on your grid. He's not even on the map, right? No one even talks about this. But who's the Shechem ben Hamor? Before we got here, who even knew about this guy? And this guy, Esav wasn't able to touch Leah, wasn't able to touch Rachel, wasn't able to touch Bilhah or Zilpah or any of the daughters born with the Shvatim. He touched nobody because he tried to bite Yaakov's neck. His teeth fell up because his neck turned to Shaish again, right? Lavan says, I wanted to, I couldn't, it all belongs to me. Couldn't touch anybody. And Shechem ben Hamor goes ahead when they're all settling down, it's nice and quiet, and takes Dinah and he forces his way with her. This terrible episode takes place, yet that's enough to make a person go crazy. So certainly to fetch and to complain and say, where is God? I mean, I fought with the angel, in love and Garti, I did all these wonderful things, I came to Shechem, Shalem, with all these fantastic successes behind me, and this is the way God thanks me? This is the way God rewards me? What, are you kidding? This is terrible. Where's God when you need Him? So Shimon and Levi say, okay, whatever, but we're going to go out and take revenge. And Yaakov says, no, there's got to be some good. No, there must be, I can't see how this is holy or how this is important or where this came from, but I got to tell you, if it happened and it happened to me, and it happened to my family, it must be hashgacha pratis, it must be for the good. That was the emotional absorption of the idea of kitzarisa im Elohim v'manashim v'tuchal. And then Akash Baruch Hu comes back and Beit El and says, now we can finish the process of naming you. Because by Abraham, it wasn't a question of intellectually and emotionally absorbing the hay, or by Sarai. They already were what they were. It was mostly really confirming their status in the eyes of the world. But by Yaakov Avinu, there was a transformation. He was crossing the book. He was becoming an Ish Shalem, an Adam Shalem over here. And that transformation had to be passed down through all the generations. There's only one problem, though. Even though he was successful, as we see what comes up after that, he was successful, the rest of the Shvatim were not, because first of all, 11 were already born, and the 12th was on his way. Whatever Yaakov accomplished, when Abraham had his name changed, Yitzchak wasn't born yet. When Sarah had her name changed, the same thing. Yitzchak wasn't born, so whatever transformation they went through was able to be given over to their son, and their son's sons, and all the generations after that. But Yaakov went through his transformation late in life, after everybody was born doing their own thing already. And Binyamin was about to be born, so whatever hashpah, right, was limited. So therefore the Gemara says, and that's why Yaakov and Yisrael are interchangeable. Because even though Yaakov himself became Yisrael, he was able to overcome and get to the Metzias of Galm Zilotov, which means two things. Galm Zilotov means everything is Hashgacha Pratis, and everything is for the good. It all is part of the master plan. A Holocaust, the Crusades, the torture, obviously the happy stuff, the good stuff, it's all, it's all for sure, right? But all of it is not one aspect. And the Leshem says that's really what the Shema is teaching us. Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad is exactly this. What do you have to tell me? Are we talking to people who don't believe in Torah? It doesn't make a difference to them. You have to know that Hero Israel, that's why it says Yisrael, not supposed to Yaakov. Hero Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. What is that supposed to? Hashem Elokim. We end off saying Hashem Elokim 7 times. Why? Because intellectually we've been able to achieve it through Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, but Sukkot is the time to integrate it. Sukkot is the time to actually become Yisrael. And that's why Sukkot corresponds to Yaakov Avinu. Right? Pesach corresponds to Abraham. Shavuos corresponds to Yitzchak. Right? And although some change it around, but for the most part, Yaakov is the one to whom Sukkot corresponds, because that's the time you finally integrate the concept of Hashem Elokim, Shema Yisrael Hashem Echad, and you actually are able to get to the level of Kisarisa im Elohim v'manashim v'tuchal. You actually emotionally integrate the message of the Shema and the name Yisrael itself. And that's really what has to happen. That's what's going on now. Now the story goes from Yaakov to the Shvat. The Shvat are now going to integrate this, and that's what Yosef is able to do. Because as Rashi pointed this week's Parsha, that when Yosef goes down to Shechem, I mean, of all the places to go, it was just about, 17 years, how many years earlier? It was 17:6. It was like 11 years earlier. This whole episode happened in Shechem where they destroyed the place, and now they're tending their sheep, grazing the sheep by Shechem over here. And Rashi says it's bad news. It's bad news because Shechem is a makam that's muchan lepoyanot. It's a place of bad news because that's where Dinah was violated. That's where Yosef is going to be sold, and that's where the Shvatim later on will divide between the Beis David, between the kingdom of Israel and the kingdom of Yehuda. That's the place of Shechem itself. That's what takes place over there. But look what happens. Dinah is violated because she's violent in the process. Okay, it's not a chachil, it's not the best way, but we're living in times of galus. We're living chutz gan eden. Things go backwards. Mimras atachbolos. It's all part of the same idea. Right? From this interaction with Shechem, Asnos is born, she marries Yosef, and Ephraim and Manasseh born from that. Right? That's a tova, that's a silver lining, this gray cloud. Because Yosef is sold, he's sold in Shechem, a terrible thing. Terrible thing. Right? And he kidnapped, and they're chayiv misa, and all these different things, but because he was sold in Shechem, he was sold to Midyanim, the Yishmaelim, down to Mitzrayim, where he was able to fulfill his destiny as a world leader. His dreams became fulfilled because he was sold in Shechem. Gamzu Tova. But to hang in there, right? To wait till the Tova actually comes, right? That's a tremendous koyach. That's what Yaakov was trying to instill. That's what the name Israel means, to get to a point, and even though it sounds kind of like Pasha, very, very, very simple, you see it's not true b'chlal. You watch people in life, you watch the way they behave in shuls, you watch the way they behave in the makolit, you watch the way they behave in situations that are difficult. People are not real with the concept of Gamzu Tova. And you can't really get to the level of completion of shleimus until you do, because that's what it means to be Yisrael. A Yisrael is somebody who's able to be holding the level where Gamzu Tova is real to them, not only intellectually, but emotionally as well. That's the transformation. And that's what this whole story with Yosef coming up, this week's Parsha, was going on. You just look at the whole thing. And Rashi points out, by Yosef himself, right? What happens? That Yosef, he's doing well for himself. He's already out of jail. Actually, he wasn't in jail yet. He was bought by Potiphar. He's master over his master's house. He's running everything except for his, master's wife, right? And he's curling his hair and he's treating himself like a melech. So Kadosh Baruch Hu says, your father's in mourning, and this is what you do. This is the way, this is how you live your life. I'll stick the bear on you over here, right? But again, it sounds like an onish, but because this whole thing happens, what happens, right? Because had this episode not taken place, Yosef may only have remained head of Potiphar's house. But because the wife goes after him and he rejects her, he becomes zocher to become a leader. He goes to jail because of it. Because he's in jail, he becomes famous because of his interpretation of dreams. Because of his interpretation of dreams, Paro pulls him out later on, and he becomes viceroy of Egypt. And that's the way it's always working out, right? I mean, the classic cases, this again, it's a very hard thing to say because people are very sensitive, but you can't deny the historical reality, and that is basically that the Holocaust resulted in the founding of the state of Eretz Israel. Obviously, people don't hold that's very important, but reality is that here we are today. The Jewish people are on the land. It's developed. It's built up. We not only have survived, we have thrived. Now, the truth is, we'd be much better, obviously, not to have paid that price. If we had been asked by God, you can have the land at the cost of 6 million lives, we wouldn't have taken the deal, obviously. Who would have, even for a couple of lives, who would take the deal? Because, we value the life of every single Jew, and who's to decide who lives and who dies in the end? Because Baruch Hu makes the cheshbonos. And historically, retroactively, we can look back and say, well, that's clearly what happened. That was the threshold to get to this point over here. Right? So everything, by definition, has to work out in the end. And even though we can't always see it, and it's not necessarily in our lifetime, it's going to take place, but that's the driving belief of Yisrael. And as long as a person is working on that, he's doing Avodas Hashem. The learning, the Gemara, right, the halacha, the hashkafa, the musar, it all fits into this. If a person is not using all of that, and on top of that, of course, life experiences, if a person is not using all of that to get to the point where he can be emotionally connected and real with Gamzu Tova, that no matter what happens in the course of his life, that he can just basically say it with a full heart and realize that every situation, as bad as it is, it's not a question about it could be always worse. It's not a question about being worse. It's a question of that somehow, as bad as it is right now, somehow the concluding story of this, because I'm a Jew, Because I'm part of Klal Yisrael has to have a positive end. The way I would write that positive end, not necessarily, but when it's all said and done, Yemos Mashiach, we're looking back at the entire situation, will also be musky. It was all for the good in the end. And that's what Yaakov was able to instill in the Jewish people, at least to some degree, by the whole episode of what last week was coming up in this week's parsha, because also the same thing as well. The suffering still goes on, as Rashi points out. He went to settle down. He wasn't able to settle down because Yosef was taken. The whole thing happened all over again. He wasn't able to stop his mourning, but again, because of this entire thing, the family is saved. Yaakov is reunited with Yosef once again later on. Everybody lives happily ever after, at some point in time, except for the brothers, because they're still floundering, trying to, figure out what went wrong and how they missed the point. And that's why, as the Gemara points out, Yaakov is still a name to be used because of the fact that the Jewish people have not yet absorbed the lesson and won't be able to absorb the lesson until Yemos Mashiach, which is why the Malbim points out that the real battle comes down at the end of history of Hashkachik battle, and it's not against the Gentiles per se necessarily, but rather the Shebud will come to an end, he says, and the Jewish people have a choice. And the Jewish people divide the two sections, what they call the Yaakov part, which says Hamona Am, it's the majority of the people. He actually calls it the lesser element, but he goes, the majority of people will choose to stay in the diaspora, choose to take up positions among the Gentiles and say, after all these years of suffering, after all these years of having to pay the price of being Jewish, we're finally being respected and given the opportunity to work and make money and have leadership positions. This is like Geula, right? This is worth staying around for and living through. And a small contingent, which he calls the Yisrael component, they will say, no, this is not where it's at. This is only part of the plan. It's a stepping stone. They will be the ones who will return to Israel and will not accept anything less than the return of the nation back to the land, the building of the Beis Hamikdash, the Shekhinah returning to the Beis Hamikdash, and in their schus, the schus of the Yisrael component of Klal Yisrael, Mashiach will finally come and end everything basically and show how the Kosh Baruch Hu was behind everything. It was all for the good.